Welcome to the eShopperReviews podcast, episode 9. This is the podcast for December 2021. I'm Jenn-submitted.
And I'm Jake McNeil.
For those new to this podcast, eShopperReviews is a subreddit on reddit.com where Jake reviews games on the Nintendo Switch platform, and you can find this subreddit at the URL reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. We currently have over 1,600 reviews and counting, and we are supported by your donations on our Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. This month's sponsors are Andy Miller, Johannes,
Reddit user Rambo Fox.
Yeah, alright. Xleen, Stove, Ilya Zarev, Eli Goodman, Connor Armstrong, and KH. Thank you all for helping to keep the reviews coming.
Also, before we move on, we want to take a moment to thank our Patreon sponsors whose donation last month came after we recorded this podcast. Those are MB, Reddit user Rambo Fox, and Xleen. We want to thank you again for your contributions.
So, on to the discussion topics for today. Our patron-voted game is Big Brain Academy, Brain vs. Brain.
This one was a unanimous vote. Apparently there was no other game that the patrons voted for this month, so this is definitely going to be a game that I review. Probably the review's going to go up after this is posted, and it's not out yet. This is actually the first time I've put up the option for a game to be voted on when it hasn't been released yet. I figured, well, it's the end of the year. Let's, give a chance to this December game in any case. And I guess that's the one that got chosen. So I guess we'll find out soon enough if it is worth the vote.
So our year-end patron-voted game is Quake or Eastward.
Those who've been paying attention to the subreddit will know, in addition to the usual patron vote for which game to review in a given month, this month I also opened it up for patrons to vote on a game from throughout the year for me to review prior to doing my end of the year, best of the year kind of article thing. And this one resulted in a tie between Quake and Eastward. And you'll find out when I review it which one I decided to go with.
And we have a patron-supported game. MB requested Crash Bandicoot 4. It's About Time.
This one has already been reviewed in the month of November. It was pretty good. I think it has, of course, a lot in common with the remasters of the Insane trilogy. That's kind of to be expected given how well the Insane trilogy went over. It has a few unique mechanics as well. I think on balance, if you haven't played any of these games, probably the Insane trilogy is going to be the better way to go since it's kind of 3 games in one. But Crash Bandicoot 4 is also pretty solid. That's my very quick run through of the game. Anyway, thank you MB for making that review possible. I was happy to review it.
So, news from the last month, which is quite a bit. Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack launches to fan backlash due to price and emulation problems.
This was, of course, to be expected. I mean, even prior to the launch, people were kind of iffy about the price of this expansion pack. But then for it to launch with all sorts of emulation problems, and I covered this when I did my look over the contents of the expansion pack earlier in the month. Basically, the Genesis games are fine. They're fine, but most of them are already available on the Nintendo Switch in some other form. The Nintendo 64 games have multiple emulation issues. They aren't displaying fog properly. The control bindings are strange and cannot be reassigned. Not exactly the ideal way to play these games. And I think people were expecting more for the extra, $20 a year, something like that. And on top of that, Nintendo still hasn't addressed a lot of the problems that are in just the core Nintendo Switch Online service. There's still no native voice chat. There is a lack of any kind of communication between users. Just simple things like that haven't been addressed, and to me this feels like they're pulling attention away from that and just focusing on the games. And even that they messed up this time, unfortunately.
Oof, that sucks. Next piece of news, Pikmin Bloom releases on mobile devices.
I haven't tried this one yet. This is by the same people who do Pokemon Go. I've heard it's decent, but it's not as involving as Pokemon Go is. But I can't speak to it personally. I don't know. I haven't played it yet.
All right. Nintendo clarifies that November 5th's Animal Crossing 2.0 update and Happy Home Paradise will be the game's final major unpaid DLC and final major paid DLC.
This was a bit frustrating because we've gone so long without any significant updates to the game, and we finally got two at the same time that were really good. I actually really enjoyed the content from both of the paid and unpaid updates here. You know, it seemed like finally they were giving Animal Crossing the attention it deserved when it came to post-launch content, and just when we're finally starting to get the good stuff, they're like, okay, that's it, you're done. At the very least, I'm still playing through the latest updates. There's plenty of stuff to go through. It'll keep me busy for a while, especially with all the other stuff I have on my plate. But it's still disappointing that we're not going to see anything else after this. Not anything else major in any case.
The World Ends With You Final Remix game trial for Nintendo Switch Online members.
This was for a week in mid-November from the 10th through the 16th. Nintendo Switch Online members had a week where they could play The World Ends With You Final Remix for free during that week. This comes after the Japanese version of Nintendo Switch Online had a similar free trial week for the same game. This is not the more recent Neo The World Ends With You. This is the earlier one, which was originally a Nintendo DS game. The port to Nintendo Switch was kind of the controls weren't quite right because it was really meant for the Nintendo DS. By the time you're listening to this week-long trial will have been well over. I mean, we're recording it now and it's been over for weeks. I'm kind of wondering if this is even something we should bother discussing. It was newsworthy, but it's already done and gone. So if you don't want us to keep mentioning these game trials in these podcasts, go ahead and chime in the comments and say so. But in the meantime, I figure I'll just go ahead and mention them because it is something newsworthy that happened.
Nikkei reports Nintendo Switch production 20% less than planned this fiscal year.
This is not a great surprise. There's been a semiconductor shortage. This is really just a confirmation of that fact. I don't think that there's anything truly groundbreaking here, but it is something noteworthy to report.
Twitch is now available on Switch.
Yeah, just, 4 years too late, guys. I should note that you cannot stream to Twitch from Switch.
That's a shame.
But you can at the very least view Twitch on Switch. For those of you who actually even still care.
Yeah. Mario Kart Live Circuit 2.0 update has been released.
This was a really big surprise. I don't think anyone expected post-launch content for Mario Kart Live. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is a Mario Kart game that comes with a physical remote-controlled car that you play with using the game, and the game kind of interprets input from a camera on the remote-controlled car into the game, and it overlays parts of the game onto that camera footage.
It's very cute.
It's fun, it's cute, it's niche, it's not for everyone. But they've added additional content to the game, I guess ahead of holiday sales for Mario Kart Live, and this is a little bit of an extra, hey, we've even added stuff, come and buy it kind of thing.
Mario Golf Super Rush Update 4.0 has been released.
We'll talk a bit more about Mario Golf Super Rush a bit later in this podcast, but essentially this particular update adds 2 new characters, Wiggler and Shy Guy. It adds 2 new courses, Shelltop Sanctuary and All-Star Summit. It adds 2 new game modes, Target Golf and one-on, one-putt mode. And it also adds some small tweaks and game adjustments. They have made it clear this will be the last free update for the game. No word if they're planning on paid updates, but if it's anything like Mario Tennis, I would say don't plan on it.
Tencent buys Wake Up Interactive, owners of Soleil Limited.
For those who are not aware, Soleil Limited are the makers of Ninjala and Travis Strikes Again. I was not the biggest fan of Ninjala, but I know that there are fans out there. And I always get a bit iffy about any small company getting bought out by a major one, but in particular when a small game developer gets bought out by a Chinese game company, I kind of cringe a little, and it has nothing to do with the Chinese people and everything to do with the Chinese government and the way that they like to get their sticky fingers in all of the businesses there. In particular, in recent months, Chinese authorities have really decided to lock down on the speech in video games. They've put a ban on playing video games more than a few hours a day, and they've encouraged developers to design their games in ways that discourages this. They've really been extremely hands-on in influencing the way that developers make their games now. And so that makes me all the more nervous when I hear a Chinese company has gotten their mitts on another developer.
Embracer Group announced plans to buy 37 studios in the next 12 months.
I feel like most gamers probably aren't too familiar with Embracer Group. To give you an idea, this company currently owns THQ Nordic, Deep Silver, Saber Interactive, 3D Realms, Aspire Media, Gearbox Entertainment, Zen Studios, and numerous others. These folks are huge.
Yep, they are.
THQ Nordic is pretty big. Saber Interactive does a lot of really good work on Nintendo Switch. Gearbox makes fantastic games, and this company is only growing bigger and bigger. They haven't said what any of the 37 studios they're planning to buy are, but it's anyone's guess, I suppose.
Epic Games, makers of Fortnite, buy Harmonix, makers of Rock Band and Fuser.
This kind of seemed like it was out of left field to me. I mean,
just a little bit.
I love the work of Harmonix. In particular, I still to this day play Rock Band every now and then. Fuser was good too, but it didn't quite catch me the same way that Rock Band did.
Agreed. Same for me.
Well, I'm fine with Fortnite. I don't hate it. It's got its target audience, and that target audience isn't really me, but I can appreciate it for what it is. This really seems like two completely different types of products that these companies make. And the interesting thing is, when asked what they would be doing, Harmonix basically said, well, first of all, we're going to keep updating Rock Band as we've been doing. Any planned content for Rock Band and Fuser is going to continue on through 2022 as planned. No comment about after 2022. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Mm-hmm. But they said in addition to that, they're going to be focusing on making content for Fortnite, which it's like, you specialize in music games, and I understand that there's been music content for Fortnite, but that still seems like a very strange fit.
I guess we'll see. Ubisoft Controversies. Over 1,000 current and former Ubisoft staff complained that after 100 days, none of their demands for improved working conditions have been met.
This comes in the wake of Ubisoft's 2020 sexual harassment controversies. I know a lot of people this year have been paying attention to Activision Blizzard, but there's a good argument to be made, and I would make it, that Ubisoft still hasn't fully addressed the problems that they had come up in 2020 about how their employees were abused and harassed. The employees had multiple demands. They had 4 demands, basic stuff like, hey, stop promoting and moving around known offenders from studio to studio. They wanted a collective seat at the table. They wanted to have some sort of attempt at cross-industry collaboration to try and set rules to keep this from happening, and that collaboration would involve employees rather than just management trying to do a CYA kind of thing. So none of that has happened, which is not a big surprise because these companies are loath to make any major changes that don't personally help them at the top rather than their employees.
Yeah, it's depressing.
Yeah.
Ubisoft announces pay raises to stop developers from leaving, with disproportionate raises for upper management.
This seemed like, instead of actually making an attempt to try to improve on the problems we just mentioned, issues with sexual harassment and that kind of stuff, well, we'll make things go away by spreading money on it. But we'll put a little money on the employees at the bottom, and we'll give a lot of money to the people at the top, the same people who are arguably responsible for the problems that we've talked about. It's kind of absurd. It also bears mention, we're not just talking about money. We're talking about they're giving additional vacation days and parental leave as well, which, again, this is all good stuff. We want to be sure that these employees are properly paid, but it kind of feels like it's not addressing the core problem, and it's also just giving them another excuse to give more money to the people at the top.
Okay, so in what has become a pattern...
Yes, so it would seem.
Activision Blizzard has once again entered the news for their controversy.
You don't say.
Yeah. However, it's a big chunk of news.
Well, it's not even just one big chunk of news. They kept coming into the news over and over and over and over again in the last month, and not even for the same stuff. Like, there was the Wall Street Journal expose on how not only did they do all this terrible sexual harassment stuff, but Bobby Kotick was not only aware of it, but was actively preventing those responsible from getting ousted from the company. He was protecting abusers. And there's been all kinds of fallout as a result of that. And that's just one story. There's also how they have blindsided Vicarious Vision employees who are now being absorbed into Blizzard, and without any warning, the Vicarious Vision's name is just gone. There's been multiple things this month, and yeah, maybe we shouldn't go through all of that. Just suffice it to say, all of this stuff is addressed on the bad behavior profile for Activision Blizzard. So if you want to get caught up on all of the stuff that they've done, and it is a lot, you can head over to that page. Just
be prepared. It's not pretty.
No, it isn't.
All right, so to talk about some more lighthearted and fun things.
Hopefully.
Yeah. We'll talk about the highlights of the games that eShopperReviews covered in the month of November 2021. Just a note here, these are not necessarily games released in November, but games reviewed in the last month, and we'll start by talking about the best games.
Yes.
Monster Hunter Rise.
I can hear some excitement in your voice.
Okay, so I played Monster Hunter World on the PC, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I spent quite a bit of time on this game. So, yes, I will be getting Monster Hunter Rise on the PC.
But in the meantime, you are enjoying it on the Switch.
Yes, I am.
I'm sad to hear it sounds like they are not going to be implementing crossplay between Switch and PC, unfortunately.
Yeah, which is unusual because...
It's not unusual. They didn't implement crossplay in Monster Hunter World.
Okay, I think it's unusual because one of the concerns with crossplay is the gap in...
the mouse and keyboard versus controller issue?
Yes, but there isn't really PvP in Monster Hunter Rise, so...
Well, I don't think that's really the reason that they didn't do it. I think it was just a matter of they didn't want to go through the trouble of implementing
Which is fair,
feature.
which is fair.
Anyway, we're not talking about the future and the PC release of the game. We're talking about the Nintendo Switch release of the game. And this review has been a long time coming. I didn't review it at launch because I wanted to wait for a good sale. You know, I'd spend plenty enough money on video games as is. So I had to actually wait until I could find a good price for this game. And it finally came around. And wow, it is very good. I should note, I think one of my more controversial reviews on eShopperReviews is my review for Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate. And I don't remember what I gave that. I know it was somewhere in the range of C-, something like that.
Not nearly as high as this current game.
No. I was not a fan of Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate. I thought In particular, the tutorial was just incredibly bad and killed enthusiasm for the game. The controls were awkward, the way everything was structured was unnecessarily confusing. I feel like Monster Hunter Rise, first of all, has incorporated a lot of elements from Monster Hunter World that streamlined the formula and made it more user-friendly. It's still a bit clunky and confusing. There's still a lot of stuff that I feel like needs to be properly explained to newer players that isn't in the game. But I feel like it is a much better game as a result of the streamlining that we're talking about. But even beyond that, this isn't just Monster Hunter World, but for Switch. This game actually expands on that formula with the Wirebug and the Palamute.
Oh my gosh, the Palamutes. The Palamutes.
They gave players in this game two really good traversal options where, number one, you can get around more quickly using the Palamutes. Number two, you have a lot more verticality due to both the Palamute and especially the Wirebug. And in previous games, if you had a wall or something, that would just be something blocking your path. But now you actually have an option to move vertically. And because of that, they've even adapted the level design to incorporate that. You have these huge valleys, you have great cliff sides, you have mountainous terrain, and all of this is something where it's open to you to climb if you want to, and this really opens up the game. And on top of that, this of course changes combat, where now you have options where you can fling yourself over a monster onto the other side, you get the ability to swing yourself around, you can hop off of a jumping Palamute to slam down on the monster from above. Really great stuff that expands on the core gameplay of this game. And there's so much that I can talk about here. It is a beautiful, gorgeous Nintendo Switch game. It is graphically quite possibly one of the best looking games on the Nintendo Switch. It has a good soundtrack, great multiplayer. I mean, Jen and I have played this in multiplayer for
hours.
For hours, yes. This is one of my most played games on Nintendo Switch this year. So there is so much good stuff I can say about Monster Hunter Rise, but I will finish on this note, which is, I am someone who was not a big Monster Hunter fan previously. I got flack for giving a low review score to the last Monster Hunter game on Nintendo Switch. And me, this guy who was not very keen on the last one, is saying that this is a fantastic game, one of the best games on Nintendo Switch this year. So take that for what it is, and I definitely hope you give it a try. It is well worth it.
Next game, Tetris Effect Connected.
Tetris Effect Connected was released on other consoles prior to this. I had briefly played it on, I want to say PlayStation 4. So it's not really a big surprise to me that this game is amazing because I already knew it was amazing. But the Nintendo Switch port is extremely good. It is an audio-visual treat. There is a very clear reason why this was released on the same day as the Nintendo Switch OLED model. I don't have an OLED Switch, but I have to imagine if I was playing this on an OLED Switch, it would be a really great showpiece for the new screen. It looks great, it sounds great. It is quite possibly the best version of Tetris ever made. If you are a puzzle game fan and you haven't already had your fill of this game on other platforms, and even if you have, Tetris and handheld games, goes hand in hand. This is a wonderful, wonderful game. I highly recommend it.
Crysis 3 Remastered and Crysis Remastered Trilogy.
This is another case of I was kind of blown away by how good this game looks. And keep in mind, Crysis 3 is a game that came out, like a decade ago on other platforms? It is not a new game, not even close to new. But it was still pretty cutting edge at the time of its release. And the port to Nintendo Switch is fantastic. There are clearly some cutbacks that they had to make in some areas, but not nearly as much as you would think. It looks really, really good. And unlike the prior two Crysis games, which had some issues here and there, I would say, I feel like Crysis 3 really nails some of the elements that I've been wanting them to get right for the entire series. Like, the stealth stuff in Crysis 3 just feels great. I thoroughly enjoy this game. The one criticism I can make about this is they chopped off the multiplayer mode. It is no longer in the game, unfortunately. But that is true of all platforms. Crysis 3 on PlayStation and on Xbox and on PC, all of those versions of Crysis 3 remastered do not have the multiplayer. So that's not a Switch problem, that's this version of the game problem. But even with that omission, even with that content cut, this is a fantastic game. If you like first-person shooters and you have a Nintendo Switch, this is a game that should definitely be at the top of your list.
Atelier Ryza and Atelier Ryza 2.
I reviewed a lot of the Atelier games this month. In fact, I reviewed every single one of them that released on Nintendo Switch. Yeah, it's a lot. And out of all of those games, the Ryza ones are by far the best. Ryza 2 is a very good sequel, but I want to say Ryza 1 has just this perfect balance of this almost Miyazaki-esque feeling of simple beauty and really great characters and a world that you just want to explore. The music was absolutely gorgeous. The visuals, I have to add a caveat, which I'll come to in a moment, but the visuals are truly excellent. Just everything about this game feels magnificent. Now, to get back to that caveat, the Atelier games, especially late into the series, on Nintendo Switch have a pretty nasty problem with dithering. For those who aren't familiar with dithering, it's kind of hard to describe, but it's basically this way of simplifying, I want to say, the resolution, or it changes the way that gradients look. So if one color is fading into another, it looks a lot more harsh than a natural progression. Again, it's hard to describe in terms of words. It's something that it's once you get used to what you're looking at, you get a feel for what it looks like. And the late Atelier games are particularly bad with it on Switch. And Ryza and Ryza 2 are definitely suffering from this terribly. And it's a shame because otherwise they look magnificent. They are really beautiful games. I should take a moment also to mention Ryza 2. While it doesn't have the same kind of simple beauty of the first Ryza game, it does a few things that are really good in its own right. In particular, it brings back kind of the open-ended world that we had only previously seen in Atelier Firis. And that was one game that really set Firis apart from the other games in the series. And Ryza 2 brings it back, so there's a much bigger area to explore. It's not quite open world, but it's kind of leaning in that general direction. And I feel like that and some of the other elements in Ryza 2 did improve on the first one, even though I kind of still feel like the first Ryza is overall the better game, just by a little sliver. And for those who are wondering, since I'm talking about all the different Ryza games, if I were ranking the Ryza games, my order of ranking from the one that I like the least to the one that I like the most. First of all, let's get it out of the way. Nelke and the Legendary Alchemists, it doesn't count. It's not really an Atelier game. It's a spin-off game. It plays completely differently. I thought it was kind of, it was okay, but it had some elements that weren't quite great. Okay, but as far as the Atelier series in general, my order of preference from the one I like the least to the one I like the most: Totori, Rorona, Ayesha, Sophie, Meruru, Eska and Logi, Firis, Lydian Suel, Lulua, Shally, Ryza 2, Ryza 1. And if you have never played any of the games in this series and are looking for the best place to start, I'll just make it easy for you. Start with Ryza 1. That is the best place to start, and if you find out that you like it, you can move on to Ryza 2, and if you want more than that, then you can work your way back in the series. But Ryza 1 is the perfect place to start this series if you want to give it a try. This is a series of JRPGs with a focus on crafting.
Okay, next up. Persona 5 Strikers.
For you podcast listeners, I'm going to let you in on a little secret that I have not actually mentioned in my review. I have not played Persona 5 yet. I know that this is...
What?
I have a full plate, what can I say? It's on my to-do list. I want to play it. And I really want them to bring it to Nintendo Switch so I have the perfect excuse to play it. And it's kind of frustrating that they haven't brought any of the core Persona games to Nintendo Switch. I know that it's great. You don't need to convince me it's great. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. So, Persona 5 Strikers is a sequel to that game, but it's a sequel in a completely different gameplay style. And it's clear when playing this game that they're referring back to plot developments that happened in the first game. The characters all have a dynamic that I'm sure was formed in the first game. And if you have not played the original Persona 5, or the most recent version of it is, I believe, Persona 5 Royal, you will be at a loss for some of the goings-on in this game, which makes it all the more perplexing why Sega or Atlus have released this game on the Nintendo Switch without also releasing Persona 5. It's inexplicable. But in any case, they did that. It is what it is. This is where we are now. And even though I'm frustrated that they haven't released Persona 5 on Switch, I'm still glad that they released Persona 5 Strikers on Switch because it is a fantastic game. A lot of people look at this game and think that this is a Musou-style game, like the Warriors-style games like Dynasty Warriors and all of that. And that's not really accurate. It incorporates elements of those games, but all of the battles in Persona 5 Strikers are fairly self-contained to a small area. You're not going over a large map and quelling different areas where there are a bunch of troops there. You'll get into a battle in a local area just as any JRPG might have you do. And then when that battle starts, you'll have dozens of enemies appear at the same time, and you'll have to shuffle back and forth between them, fighting them off, maybe taking on, a dozen or so enemies at a time. And the battle system in this is great. It feels great. There's a lot of mobility. You can jump up on street lights and then dash down to attack an enemy. The game has a lot of style and a really great soundtrack, which, again, I feel like, of course it does because it's based on the Persona series, which is known for those things. It's just a really great action RPG. Do not look at this and say, well, I don't like those Musou-style Dynasty Warriors games. I won't like this. Don't think of it like that. It really is a lot closer to an action RPG. It just incorporates some of those Musou elements into it, but that doesn't mean that those elements take over the game. It's still very much its own thing, and I highly recommend it.
Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania.
This was a patron-sponsored game. Thank you again, patrons. This is a compilation / remake-ish kind of thing of Super Monkey Ball 1, 2, and Deluxe. And for those who aren't familiar with the Monkey Ball series, Super Monkey Ball 1 and 2 are generally seen as the pinnacle of this series. This series went downhill after Monkey Ball 1, 2, and technically Deluxe, which was kind of a remake of 1 and 2 in itself. So the real question is, after all of these years, all of these unsatisfying sequels to the game, can they still make a really good Monkey Ball game if they start with the core formula when it was at its best? And the answer is absolutely yes. This game is still magnificent. The level design is great. The controls feel good. I understand that people who want to nitpick are like, well, it doesn't feel exactly like it did back in the old days. You know what? It feels close enough. It feels very, very good. It still has some issues with the camera. I wish the camera was a bit better here, but there's some control over the camera. It's better than it used to be, at least. There's tons of multiplayer content here. Really good, fun multiplayer stuff. I feel like this is the Monkey Ball game that fans of the series have been waiting for years. And if you're not a fan of the series, know that it's a fairly simple game. You're basically trying to roll a ball to an exit on a stage where you need to carefully avoid falling off the edge of the stage. And in any case, this is an excellent family-friendly game. It's tons of fun. I was very pleased to play this. Thank you again, Patreon sponsors. This was a great pick.
Last one is Unavowed.
Unavowed really took me by surprise. This is a game that brings to mind kind of the LucasArts style, what people sometimes call point-and-click adventure games. I call them graphic adventure. And specifically LucasArts style because this is one that has you managing multiple characters at a time, different characters with different abilities, and you get to choose which characters you bring with you on each assignment. And the characters you have with you will determine what skills you have available to you to solve the various puzzles that you'll encounter. That in and of itself is really clever, really well done. In fact, I would argue it's done better here than it's ever been done in the previous LucasArts games. But beyond that, what really impressed me with this game is the storytelling here is magnificent. There's really good voice acting, excellent writing, and the choices you make really do feel like they matter. The story here is about this individual who finds themselves possessed by a demon or something like that, and then is rescued by this covert organization who investigates paranormal crimes or something like that. And so throughout the course of the game, you're trying to solve the mystery of just what happened to you at the same time as you're solving these paranormal incidents that have cropped up. And all of the characters have this kind of dynamic with each other. There's a really great back and forth chit chat. Like, if you just leave them idling, they'll start talking about what's going on, or they'll talk to each other about, whatever it is that's going on between them. And the quality of dialogue here is incredibly good. The characters are extremely likable. I know I'm repeating myself, but it's just a magnificent game. If you are a fan of this genre, this is a must-have game.
So, moving on to the worst games.
Yes.
Train Station Simulator.
I love management sims.
I do too.
If I get a really good management sim, it makes me incredibly happy. And likewise, it makes me incredibly disappointed when I play a truly bad one. And Train Station Simulator fails on multiple levels. It looks bad, it has a confusing interface, the controls are terrible, and the tutorial is worse than useless. Like, it junks out, it doesn't even necessarily wait to see that you understand what's going on before it moves on. It's poorly written, and after going through this terrible tutorial, I still found myself struggling with the basics of how do I even play this game. It's confusing.
Yikes.
There is nothing about this game that works right, in my opinion. It's close to being unplayable. I wouldn't quite go that far. I'm sure that if you really poured yourself into it and tried to figure out what the game's creators couldn't be bothered to tell you, you could find a way to play this game and maybe make it worth your while. But honestly, I would say you're much better off just playing a different management simulation that isn't crap.
Alright, next one is Scribbled.
This one, I don't really have too much to say about it. It is a platformer. It's ugly. It's poorly made. It has hand-drawn visuals for no apparent reason other than, I guess, the creator maybe didn't have the skills to make the visuals look good. The soundtrack's bad. The gameplay is boring. There's no reason that you would want to play this. Not on a game system where you have access to Mario and a zillion other good platformers.
Squad Killer.
This is another game with really bad graphics that are almost like handmade for no good reason. It's not quite as bad as Scribbled. It's kind of different in that it's more action focused, but it's still just not very good. Bullet sponge enemies, poor progression. It's not fun.
Last one is Gin Conception.
It's frustrating for me to have to include this game in my worst reviewed games this month because I really wanted this to be a better game. I love the originality that went into the concept of this game, which is combining a classic JRPG like Chrono Trigger, which is my favorite game of all time, by the way, and a werewolf-style game kind of like Among Us, where you're trying to figure out which of your party members is secretly working against you or something. Mm-hmm. Really great concept. but I felt like on multiple levels this failed to execute properly. I mean, I could start with the fact that the difficulty level in this game is absurdly high. You find yourself surrounded with different areas you can go to, and there are all kinds of enemies that can one-hit kill you. The mechanics of the game are not really properly explained to the player. You're not really told what all of the different status effects are. You're not told about how the mechanics of the magic system work. So right off the bat, you're dying repeatedly due to a fact that you're not given proper information, and due to the game being really on the high side of the difficulty curve right from the start. The characters are not properly introduced. The world is not properly introduced. You're left in this spot of, I don't know who these people are or why I should care about them or what they're bothering to do. And the game looks nice, but it's also very repetitive in its visuals and with maze-like areas that are difficult to remember how to navigate because they all look so repetitive. I love the concept of this game. I really wanted to enjoy this game, and it was just a huge disappointment because the reality failed to deliver on the concept, I feel.
All right, so we're moving on to the hidden gems.
Yes.
First one is Hexseed.
Hexseed was another one that really, really surprised me, and it surprised me in multiple ways. This is a free-to-play game. Start downloading it now. Seriously, don't wait for me to finish. This game you might as well get on your Switch. If you hate it, it's cost you nothing. It is free to play, but it doesn't have free to play monetization. The monetization in this game is basically, hey, if you like the massive number of puzzles that are in this game, you can pay a bit extra for an expansion pack to get more puzzles.
Cool.
But there's plenty of content just in the core game here. And this is a game that plays kind of like a hex-based version of Minesweeper, where you're trying to find where the safe tiles are and where the not safe tiles are and mark off which is which without accidentally hitting one that's an unsafe tile. But they have changed up the gameplay to be a bit more in the direction of a constructed puzzle, so there aren't any situations where you're stuck and you have to just randomly guess. And they've added different types of tiles that give different types of hints. So where in Minesweeper, you'll click on a tile and it'll tell you, there are this many bombs adjacent to this tile. In Hexseed, you'll click on a tile and it'll tell you in this direction, there are this many bombs or this many tiles you're not supposed to click. Or it'll say in this general area, there are this many. And using the hints that you get from these tiles, you're supposed to narrow down, okay, where are the places that are safe to click, where are the places that are unsafe to click. The visuals in this game are extremely simple and unimpressive, but as a puzzle game, this is magnificent. This is a fantastic game for puzzle fans, and it's absolutely free. If you like puzzle games, get Hexseed. It is well worth downloading.
Pixel Puzzle and Watch Collection.
Man, I reviewed some good puzzle games this month. Pixel Puzzle and Watch Collection is interesting in that it is a puzzle game or a collection of puzzle games, but it is not just that. It is also a really interesting simulation. And while the puzzle games included here are quite good, I mean, you have a Picross style game, you have 2 other different types of games. And each has, I think about like 100 different puzzles included with it. I think. I'm just going off of memory here. What really makes this particular release impressive is the amount of effort that has gone into the simulation elements of this. Because the premise behind this game is you start it up and it presents you with 3 packages like you just bought an old style Game & Watch handheld game. And in order to play these games, you have to open into the package like you'd open into a real physical package. It comes with its own little instruction manual, and you can page through it. You can take a look at the box. You can spin around the little console and look at it from different angles. And it continues this in its various simulation elements. All of the buttons correspond to buttons on the actual device. If you are playing the game in handheld mode using a touchscreen, if you press the touchscreen, it acts like it actually would if you pressed an LCD device, where it displays all of the LCD little areas that fill up when it plays. I don't even know how to describe this properly. It's just the amount of attention to detail that went into the simulation elements of this game when they never had to do any of this. Really, it could have just been a puzzle game and it would have been fine. But they went the extra step to really deliver on the presentation here, and I really appreciated that. It's fantastic.
Mike Dies.
Oh, poor Mike. Mike Dies was another one that really surprised me because this is a $1 game. And with any game that costs less than the $2 sale price that so many games get dropped down to try to convince you to buy them, any game that's under that amount, it just seems like, well, this has to be a low effort affair. Why would you even bother with this? Mike Dies, on the other hand, is a platformer that's really clever. It's a very challenging platformer, and it has an interesting premise, which is at the end of every level, you're trying to get yourself to a kind of teleportation field that'll get you to the next area. However, the catch is Mike's entire body needs to be inside that teleportation field, and if it's not, it will kill him. So sometimes the teleportation field will be two fields that move around and you need to get into it while they are together or else he'll die. Sometimes the teleportation field is in the air and you need to find a way to jump so that you're in the air long enough to teleport, or he'll fall down and his legs get chopped off and he'll die.
Oh.
Or sometimes the entire level will be filled with small teleportation fields, but that's not a good thing because if you stay in them long enough, it'll teleport away a part of his body and he'll die. And I thought it was a really clever take on the genre, kind of a bit in the direction of a puzzle platformer, but mostly it's just a straight up platformer. And for $1, I don't expect that level of ingenuity or creativity. This is a really well-made platformer, and for $1, you're not risking much. I highly recommend you give this a try if you're a fan of the genre.
Alright, so moving on to other noteworthy reviews, we have Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time.
I addressed this one earlier, but I still wanted to recognize it here. This was a Patron-supported review, supported by the patron MB. I really liked it. It looks great. It plays great. If you're a fan of platformers, I highly recommend it. If you have not yet played the Crash Insane Trilogy, I recommend you go for that one first, but this one is an excellent follow-up to that trilogy.
Thanksgiving Leftovers Week, Mario Golf Super Rush re-review.
So I did a lot of re-reviews for the final week of the month here, kind of my Thanksgiving leftover idea. Hopefully that came across okay. The first re-review I did was of Mario Golf Super Rush. Like I said earlier, they've been adding a lot of extra content to the game, and so I wanted to take another look at it and say, did this extra content change my opinion of the game? And in short, no, it didn't. I still feel like this game, even with all this added content, it still feels short on content compared to some of the previous games in this series. I still feel like it's disappointing that the local multiplayer options are so limited when some of this game's modes seem like they would be perfect for local multiplayer. I still think it's a good golf game, but it has issues that none of the extra content in these updates have addressed.
Northgard re-review. I actually have played this game.
You have?
It's in my Steam library, and I actually enjoyed it.
For me, when I originally reviewed Northgard, I gave it an F, and that's because, to me, a lot of the mechanics in the game just did not work properly. And I knew at the time that I wrote this review that something didn't sit right with me. And after talking with players of this game, not Jen, but other players of the game, I kind of got a better feel for what this game was trying to do, and I realized, okay, this is something I'll have to come back to at some point. And this week marked kind of the perfect occasion to do that. And I will say now, it's not broken like I originally thought, but I still feel like it has some major problems. In particular, I feel like it is a lot more complex than it lets on. There are multiple different types of currencies that it doesn't really educate the player about. It doesn't give you an idea, if you are lacking in a particular resource, how the best way to go about getting more of that resource is, which is kind of important when one of those resources is workers. And if you have unassigned workers in this game, that's the most valuable thing, because those are what you need to make every other type of worker. And while you can have a population number and a max population number, like, it doesn't go into a lot of this. It does a very poor job conveying that information. So
I have to disagree with you on that. I have a higher opinion of this game than you do, I think. And I did play it when it first came out, but I think I do hold it in a bit higher regard than you do, I think.
I think that the mechanics of the game are fine. I just think that it's more complex than it initially lets on, and it doesn't really convey things properly to the player. That's all.
Agree to disagree.
Okay.
So moving on, Burnout Paradise re-review.
With most of my re-reviews, I re-review them for one of a few reasons. Either something about the game itself changes that warrants another look, like, additional content's released, a new patch, something like that. Mm-hmm. Or my own personal opinion about the game has changed over time, and I feel like that's something worth revisiting. I've had re-reviews where both of these have been the case at various times. Burnout Paradise is one where neither of these is the case. Only one thing has changed about this game since its original release, but it's important enough that I felt like it changed my overall outlook of the game. And that is, when this game was originally released on Nintendo Switch, it released at a price of $50, which was absolutely horrendous, given that this is a super old game and it's just a straight port. And I felt like that price point was inexcusable. Mm-hmm. In the time since, it has had a price drop down to $30, which I feel is a much more reasonable price tag for this game. And it is an incredible game. It's just not an incredible game that I think is worth $50 given how old it is. $30 on the other hand, while still a bit above what you can get it at on other platforms, I feel is much more reasonable for an excellent, excellent racing game.
Fair enough. Next one is Turok 2 Seeds of Evil re-review.
Turok 2, of course, is a kind of upscaled port of the Nintendo 64 game. And when I originally reviewed this, at that time, the developer had said that they had planned on implementing a multiplayer mode into the game, but they had not done so yet. In the time since it came out, they put out a multiplayer mode for the game, and the multiplayer mode works great, but no one's playing it. So I basically re-reviewed this game to say, hey, it now has a multiplayer mode, but it doesn't matter because you can't play against anyone in it. Unless you have a friend who also has Turok 2, okay, fine, then, maybe you can get a game going on. But if you're just looking for some rando to play against online, you won't find it. And I still think it's a great game. I think it's a solid port. But the one thing that it was lacking when it first came out, now that it's back in the game, it's just too little too late.
Taiko no Tatsujin Drum and Fun.
The taiko games are games that have you drumming on a Japanese-style taiko drum. And they actually make a taiko drum accessory, which I do not own. And I'm not really overly eager to purchase because that is an accessory for one single game. Mm-hmm. Although they've recently released a couple of sequels to that, so I guess it would be for one series of games. But in any case, I don't have that accessory. All I have are the controllers for the Nintendo Switch, and there are multiple control modes that they've made available for this game, but when I reviewed this, I found all of the different control options for the game to be lacking. I felt like the motion controls were so inaccurate that you just could not play the game that way. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, the gamepad controls worked well enough, but it completely sapped all of the life out of the game. It just didn't have any of the fun that you felt like would be in a game like this. And so when I wrote the original review, this stuff just disgusted me so much that I gave it a fairly low review score. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember I was just disappointed in it. And just tossed it off of my schedule. You know what, that's it, I'm done with it. And in the time since, I gave it another look and I realized that I did a terrible disservice because, number one, I didn't realize that there was one additional control mode that I had not yet tried. And that is, this game actually has an excellent touchscreen control interface. It works perfectly. You drum on the Nintendo Switch touchscreen with your fingers. It preserves the basic core fun of the game while actually still making it well worth playing. Like it controls well too. It's still limiting in that you need to play it in handheld mode in order to take advantage of this, but it's actually worth playing if that's how you play your game. On top of this, when I originally reviewed the game, I didn't even bother to look at all the mini-game stuff that was included with it because I figured, well, if the game controls terribly, the mini-games are going to control poorly too. And again, this was doing the game a disservice because I didn't realize that the mini-games in this game are a lot like the Rhythm Heaven series, which is an incredible series of music rhythm games with a completely different type of gameplay in their own right. And all of these elements combined into this, like, I am so sorry for my original review of Taiko no Tatsujin Drum and Fun, because that game was way more fun than I gave it credit for. It just, you need to play it in a very specific way to get that fun. And I think the game is a little bit at fault here because it doesn't make it clear that it has these touchscreen controls. You have to actually go searching for them. But once you find them, if you play this in handheld mode, or conversely, if you play the mini games in multiplayer, this game is excellent fun. It's just don't play the core game in docked mode because no matter which control method you use, it sucks.
Yikes. Okay. Overview of the Nintendo Switch Online expansion packs, Nintendo 64 app, and Sega Genesis app.
I kind of touched on this earlier, but just to quickly go back to it, I've already talked about how the emulation in the N64 games is not great. I've talked about how the Sega Genesis games, most of them are already available in some other form on the Nintendo Switch. But just to talk about some of the standout games here, I felt like the best of the N64 games are The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. I think still holds up to this day. Even with the emulation issues, it's still a magnificent game. Incredible action RPG. Star Fox 64, aside from some control issues that the button assignments add into the game, which is really frustrating, it's still quite possibly the best kind of corridor space shooter type game of its kind. Sin and Punishment, the controls actually work beautifully as long as you know how to control it properly. You need to go ahead and look at my comments on it. I talk about you're supposed to play this game a very specific way, but when you do, it is tons of fun. There is nothing else like it. Mario Kart 64, not going to be threatening Mario Kart 8 Deluxe anytime soon, but still an excellent Mario Kart game. And Mario Tennis may very well be the best tennis game on Nintendo Switch, and that's including the current Mario Tennis game on Nintendo Switch. I feel like this one just gets the core basics down better. As for the Sega Genesis app, the games that are not included in some other form on the Nintendo Switch are Echo the Dolphin, which is super nostalgic, but I honestly think it's a frustrating game. I think that most people who enjoy this game, probably that nostalgia is doing a lot of work for them, let's just say. And then Musha, which is a really good shmup. It's not an exceptional or unusual shmup in any way, but it's good. It's a solid kind of space shootery type of game.
All right. So, now is when we normally answer patron-submitted questions. As a reminder, patron donors who contribute any amount can have their questions discussed on the podcast. However, this month we don't have any patron questions, so I have prepared my own.
Have you now?
Yeah. And this one is going to probably make you think.
Ooh, a question to make me think.
What game would you say captures the spirit of Christmas?
I keep coming back to one game that just keeps returning to my thoughts, which is the Animal Crossing series. Really feels to me like a game that does a great job embodying that Christmas spirit.
Okay, I agree.
But not just because they celebrate Christmas in the game. I mean, it has seasonal holidays, and Christmas is one of them, although I think they call it by some other generic name, like Gift Day or something like that. Mm-hmm. But the entire game is about fostering a friendly environment with a bunch of friendly characters. It's about giving gifts to one another. It's about doing little favors for one another and expressing your gratitude to one another. It's a very positive game. It's very life-affirming, and it's about just good vibes and good sentimentality all around. And even if you are in the middle of summer and the sun's shining down and you're on your little remote island, that sentiment still stays with you even to that completely different time of the year. Then, of course, when things get to the winter time, they more specifically go for the snow and the Christmas lights and the gifts and all of that stuff. But I still feel like that particular holiday just feels like it's just a different spin on what's already present throughout the entire game.
All right. So that wraps things up for this month's eShopperReviews podcast. Again, we want to thank all of our patrons on Patreon for contributing. Patron donors are the first ones to gain access to these podcasts, and if you are interested in becoming a donor, please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. And once again, if you're curious to read any of the reviews or content mentioned in this podcast, you can find it on the eShopperReviews subreddit at reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. Once again, this has been Jenn-submitted
and Jake McNeil.
We'll see you next month, and in the meantime, we both hope you found this content helpful and enjoyed some good games. Catch you all next time.
Later.